Well, I'd like to say good morning to everyone. My name's Nathan. I serve as the lead pastor here for those of you who are guests or visiting or new around here. And today we're kicking off a 3-week sort of message series. They're launching us into the fall that I've entitled Make Room. Make Room is the title that we're going with for the next 3 weeks. And really the big idea here is that what we want to do is make room in our lives, make room in our hearts, make room in our minds, make room in our wallet. Make room in our calendar. Make room in our relationships for the things that matter most. We're going to talk about the things that matter most over the next few weeks. And the whole idea is that we're going to take this time in these next 3 weeks to really assess our hearts, our minds, our priorities, to make space for the things that matter most. I mean, this is a great time. September, as we head into the fall season, is usually a time of new beginnings. And I know if you have little kids or teens or young adults, college, university students, that there's this natural newness of like new school year, new transition. But even if you aren't in school, September is often when you make commitments and start new things and rearrange your calendar. So it's a great time to talk about making space for the things that matter most. It's maybe the best time of the year to do some of that. Speaking of school, back to school. When I was in high school, the class that I hated most was English. If you're an English teacher, I'm sorry. It's not you. It's not even the language. I like the English language. It happens to be my favorite. It wasn't English. There were two things about English class that I absolutely hated. The first was writing essays. It seemed like all we did was write essays. I got a thumbs up in the back. Someone's like, yeah. And it was just like they had the format. They taught us how to write an essay. And I would go into an exam and it'd be like, write 5 essays. Like that was the exam. I was like, oh, no more essays. I hated writing essays. Then the second thing, and this was even worse than writing essays, oral presentations. Yeah. I am an introvert by nature, and I was terrified of standing in front of my class and talking to them, sharing my essay or what I had written. It absolutely horrified me. And God has a sense of humor because now every week I have to write an essay, stand in front of hundreds of people to deliver it, and often live on YouTube, okay, just to make it worse. And I have to do that I thank God every day for deodorant because I'm still nervous. I'm still nervous to stand up here. I'm nervous to talk to you, to share the things that I've prepared that I believe God has for our church because I don't want to get it wrong. I want to make sure that what we're talking about and what I'm pointing you towards is truth and God's word. And so I don't know about you, but what I thought I would do is share with you at the outset of this series my thesis statement. Some of you have written an essay. Know what a thesis statement is. The most important part of your essay. It is the statement that tells everyone that's reading your essay what it's all about. It's the big idea. And everything else, all the points and illustrations all come back to the thesis statement. So here's the thesis statement for the next 3 weeks, and we're just going to explore this together. If we don't make room for what matters most, there will be no room for what matters most. We'll read it and say it together. Say it with me. If we don't make room for what matters most, there will be no room for what matters most. The truth of the matter is, I don't know if you've noticed this, but empty spaces always get filled. I was saying in the first service, when I was first married, I was in construction industry, and when it came to Christmas time, they were like, there's no work, we're laying you off. And I thought, this is amazing, I have free time. And I had 2 months where I didn't have any work, and I was at home, and I was on EI, so I had a little bit of money, we weren't starving, and I thought, I'm going to accomplish all these things, and I'm going to do this stuff, and I had all this to-do list, and somehow, when I went back to work, almost nothing I had planned to do got done. And I remember reflecting back going like, where did the time go? I spent it. The time disappeared and space gets filled. Have you ever noticed this? You think, man, I have extra money. And then you look a week later, you're like, where did it go? It's like a bag with holes in it, right? It just disappears. An empty space always gets filled. So we're going to talk about priorities this week. We're going to talk about the importance of making the most important things, of putting them in the right priority sequence. That's where we're going. But to begin, I want to turn to Luke 14. So if you have a Bible, go ahead and open up to Luke 14. We're going to begin in verse 15. Interesting fact about this text that I'm going to read to you. This is actually the first Bible text I ever preached on at Pathway Church. Launch day, September 2010. I stood on a little wooden stage over there. We had this little curtain hanging, and there were about 70 people. Most of them were family and friends that did not come back the next week. Not because they didn't like the sermon, because they were from out of town and they were just there to support us. But I preached on this passage, and it's called the Parable of the Great Banquet. And there's so much to this parable, we won't get into all of it, but I want to read it to you. And so if you have a Bible, feel free to follow along. If you don't, I'm not going to put the words up here just yet. I want you to just listen to the words of this parable. And of course, this is Jesus, and he's telling a parable, which is a story that makes a point. There's a thesis statement behind this. He's making a point, and he wants us to hear and understand. Here's what he says. A man was having a great banquet and invited many. And at the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, "Come, everything is now ready." But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, "I have bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused." Another said, "I bought a yoke of oxen, 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to examine them. Please have me excused." And another said, "I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come." And so the servant came and reported these things to his master. And the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, "Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame." And the servant said, "Sir, what you have commanded has been done, and still there is room." And the master said to the servant, "Go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet." Would you join me as we open in prayer? Heavenly Father, today as we examine the words of Jesus, may they find their way into our hearts. Lord, today as we begin this series talking about making room for the things that matter most, would you help us to discern what matters most and what ought to matter most? And God, I pray that by your Spirit you would come and speak to us and guide us as we shift and shuffle our priorities to make the most important things the most important things. God, may you be most important. May you be Lord. May you sit upon the throne of our hearts today. We ask this all in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. Well, as you might have guessed, this message series is really about priorities, okay? And I've entitled this message, "No Room for God." It's kind of a downer of a title, really. I thought I should have probably renamed that. No room for God. But that's exactly what happens in this story. We have this story about the master who's invited all of these people to come to this feast, and he's prepared the food, and he's made space for everyone, and he's sent them all advance warning that it's coming, and they're all like, "We're coming, we love it, we're excited." And then when the time comes and he sends out his servant to say, "The time has now come," these people begin making excuses because they have no room in their schedule, they have no room in their hearts for God, and so they refuse to come. And I don't know about you, but I hope that this isn't going to be true of you and me when it comes to God. But I think as we dig into this more, we're going to discover that we do not always make the space for God that we ought to. Have you ever noticed, as I said earlier, that empty spaces get filled? If you've ever had a garden, what you'll notice is if you don't fill the garden with good things, it will get filled. The space does not last. Over at the building, speaking of interesting building stories, I got one. This is a little aside. We have been trying to get our occupancy permit so we can use the building for our services and meetings and youth group and all those things. And the electrician has been having trouble because the breakers keep breaking on the septic system. And he's pulling his hair out. He's coming back and forth. Mish can tell you, there was some language that wasn't godly in the hall the other day. And this guy, like, he's going to the supplier and he's bringing back new breakers and he's putting the new breakers in and they're tripping. He's like, I've never seen this before. We've tried everything. We've tested everything. It all should work. Well, he called me yesterday because they were at the building trying to get this fixed for us. And he goes, "I found the problem. There's a breaker panel out by the septic. It's on a pole. And it was sitting there all summer and it got filled with a nest of ants. Filled right through, and they were short-circuiting all the breakers. Yeah, so they vacuumed them all out, and we're good to go. So I thought that was, anyway, that's a weird story, but I thought I would share it with you. Where was I? The building. So one of the things, the city was really insistent that we had a landscape architect, and we have gardens and plants and trees and all that stuff, and we had a team of volunteers there planting trees. But one of the things they asked us to do was build this garden over by the accessible parking. And so the garden has been built, but we didn't plant anything in it. So it was just empty topsoil a month ago. I took a picture of it yesterday, and I'm going to show it to you. There it is now. And I want you to notice that this garden is not empty. It is filled with all kinds, I don't even know what they are, but there's all kinds of stuff in there that shouldn't be there. So this is what happens if we leave empty spaces in our heart. Listen, if you do not fill your mind with the truth of God's word, your mind will not be empty. Your mind will not be blank. It will be filled with all kinds of stuff. And so what we have to do is make some things a priority to put the most important things in place. So I've got a picture of another garden. The team was over there planting. And so here's a space where stuff was purposely placed in it. The particular plants in a particular order with enough space around and mulch and all of that stuff. And so this has been done on purpose. This has been done with priority in mind, where the other garden was just left empty. Now, this is an image of what I want for you. I don't want that other garden for you. I don't want your life, your relationships, your anything to look like that. I want it to look like this. I want you to put the right things in place. So as I said, this message is really, this series is really about priorities, okay? Priorities. Now, before we talk about priorities, I want to give you a definition. I like to give definitions because then we all know, when I say priority, we're all thinking the same thing. How many of you know when you say a word, and sometimes you say a word and you mean this, and they hear that? If you're married, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, priority means this: the quality or state of being prior. That means that something comes before something else. It's prior, it's before, okay? That's what priority means. Here's another definition: superiority in rank or position or privilege. That when something is priority over something else, it is above it. It is more important. They're not equal, there's priority. And here's the thing that you probably already know: all of us have a set of priorities. They're inside of us. We wrestle with our priorities constantly. And we all have them. We think we know what our priorities are, but as we're going to discover today, often what we think are our priorities are not our priorities, and our priorities only get revealed when two priorities come into tension. And then when we pick, it becomes clear which of them it is. A couple of interesting things. Priorities is not the same as preference. See, we also have preferences, but our preference is not our priority, okay? For example, let's see. I'm looking at my stuff here. Okay. If I go into a restaurant, and I'm looking at the menu. And I'm looking at the menu, and my desire as I'm looking at it is the 12-ounce ribeye steak with mushrooms and the seasonal vegetables. That's I mean, if money is no object, that's exactly what I want on that menu. You guys with me? Anybody ever done this? And then I'm looking at it, and I see the price tag, $46.99. I'm like, do I want it that bad? All of a sudden, another priority comes into play. The price tag. See, the truth is I have a budget, and I wasn't supposed to be eating lunch. I should have packed one, but I'm at the restaurant, and I got a budget, and I got the desire for the steak, and I'm looking at, and I see the chicken fingers and fries for $14.99, and I buy the chicken fingers and fries, and what that tells me is that my budget takes priority over my desire. Some people actually just do and buy whatever they desire, and they wonder why they're in financial mess. Okay? This is a priority conversation, and throughout your day, there are dozens, hundreds of these conversations happening inside, these tensions where we're wrestling with these two things, trying to decide which is going to win out. Priorities and preference are not the same thing. By the way, priorities and intentions are not the same thing. I talk to people all the time, and they're like, my intention is to help others. It's like, who have you helped lately? Nobody, but I intend to do it. I intend to be a generous person. I'm going to help people. I'm going to give money away. I'm going to bring people food. I'm going to show up and help them with my time. And it's like, oh, that's amazing that you want to be helpful and generous. Everyone I talk to intends to be generous. Not everyone is generous. Because generous people aren't different than anyone else. They've just prioritized generosity. They just said, you know what? I'm not just going to desire to do it. I'm going to actually make it a priority. I'm going to put it on my calendar. I'm going to actually take $10 and give it to somebody. That's generosity. It's not just intention, and it's not just desire. It's actually doing the thing that we're talking about. People intend to be kind. Everyone I know intends to eat healthy and go to the gym. A couple nervous chuckles, right? Because some of us are like, man, I know, I intended to do it. I bought the membership, but I haven't gone in a while. Why? Because it's not a priority. Something else has become more important than that. When it comes to, I should be doing homework. Students. The most important priority for me is finishing my essay for English. But Minecraft is calling. TikTok. I'm going to do this for an hour, and then I'm going to do this. Guess what you've just said? This is the priority. Not when I get my work done, I will reward myself with something I want to do. So that would be, so see, I just want you to see, it happens every single day. How we spend our time, how we spend our money, who we spend time with. These are all priority decisions. They're decisions that we make, and every decision we make actually reveals to us and to others what our priorities are. Mahatma Gandhi said this, it's a great quote, action expresses priorities. See, if you want to know what somebody's actual priorities are, we all say, homework's my priority, and then if you watch what you do all night, it's clearly not. We all say, my husband or wife or my kids or my job is my priority, and then you watch what they do, and it's like, clearly that is not the case, because action actually reveals your priorities. If you don't like Mahatma Gandhi, you're like, why are you quoting him in church? Here's what Jesus said. Let's quote Jesus. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus, like, if you really want to know what people treasure, if you want to know where their priorities lie, you can just follow the money. Looking at your own bank statement will tell you what you want and care about most. You can look at your calendar and go, what do I make space and time in my calendar for? That will reveal to you more about your priorities than any sort of introspection would. So we want to look at our actions and our behaviors. And so I thought what we'd do today is I have this little illustration. I've used it before many years ago, but I think it would be helpful today as we talk about priorities. This is going to be called the pillar of priorities. I'm going to set it over here. And on it, I'm going to place items of priority. So what should we put at the top? What should be the number one priority in our lives? This is not a trick question. Anybody shout it out? I hear God, I hear Jesus. Great answer. If we weren't in church, you might say something else. So at the top of our pillar of priorities is God. Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? Like if there's all these commandments in the Old Testament, and the religious leaders asked Jesus one day, they were kind of trying to trick him, and they said, what is the greatest commandment? Like if there was one command that we kept, and Jesus answers, many of you will know it, he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. In other words, Jesus says the first command is to put God first. That's it. Put God first. Love him most. Make him most important, most valuable. Put him there. And they all agreed. And you know what the second was? He said a second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Today, we're talking about making room for God. You come back next week, we're going to talk about making room for others. Okay? So if you're like, he's not talking about other people, that's why. We're going to talk about it next week. But he says the first command is to put God first. But of course, what happens in our lives, we have all of these other things. I've got a whole bunch of them. And somebody's going to be like, well, there's something missing. There's a lot of stuff missing. We could add all kinds of things to this list, but Gorilla Tape is getting stuck to everything. This church is sponsored by Gorilla Tape. Here we go. We have money and stuff. We have work. We have desire. That could be the food you want to eat, the different things you want to do for fun. We've got a spouse here, okay? We got hobbies under there. There's a little hockey stick. We got friends, and under here we have kids. So what do you guys think should go next? Shout out some answers here. What goes under God here? What's the next highest priority in someone's life? What ought it to be? Okay, I'm hearing spouse. I think I heard somebody say kids. So I got spouse and kids. I think we all agree these are pretty important, right? All right, how's that? The first service, they yelled at me when I did this. They're like, no, fix that. Okay. If you've been around church for a while, then you would say, you know what, this is not right. That the biblical model is that the marriage comes first and the kids come second. That if you are committed to somebody and you love that person, support them, that this actually, having this in the right order, actually creates a healthy home and space for kids to thrive in. That's not talked about in our culture today. And even though as the right answer would be like, this is the right answer, this is not actually how things always play out. I can say over the last 20-some years, my wife and I have been raising our 4 kids. It hasn't always looked like this. And there are times, I will admit, when our kids get up here and, no, things get out of order. And the problem is that if somebody asks me, hey, Nathan, where's God in your priority list? I'm like, He's number 1. Love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But if they looked at my calendar and if they looked at my checkbook and they looked at how I'm spending my time and my attention and my love and passion, it might look something more like this. Because remember, priorities are revealed in our actions. And so, again, we all know the right answer, but knowing the right answer doesn't mean that we're living out the right answer. Is that making sense? And so that's why we have conversations like this, to begin to reshuffle the sequence of where things are and ought to be. So I've got some more. Let's stick the rest of them on here. And we may not all agree. Okay, what do we got? We got work, money and stuff. We got desire. Okay, what goes next? Somebody shout something out. What? Sports. All right, we want that next? No. I lost it. Here it is, hobbies. All right, I'm going to stick it here for now. Oh. Golf. I'm kidding. Okay. Pickleball. You got to do your thing. Okay. We got work, friends, money and stuff. What do we want next? Friends. I'm hearing a lot of people saying friends. That's good. So we'll put friends up here. Okay? So here's a problem. If I put work here, yeah, that's a problem, right? Because if work becomes before hobbies, I'm not going to have a job very long. Yeah. So I might have to flip these around. We've got money and stuff, desire. Where do these fit? All right, we'll put them down the bottom. Let's stick, no. See, if I put this first, this will also be a problem. Okay, let's do this. Now again, we can shuffle these around. You can come up after the service and put them in whatever order you want. But the truth of the matter is what I'm doing right now, putting these in sequence, you're all doing it every day. And the order you're putting them in is not necessarily what you think, because it's revealed in your actions. And really, if you wanted to know, you could just ask your spouse, your parents, your brother or sister, a close friend who knows you well, and you'd be like, here's my list, and they'll just start laughing. They'll be like, that's not your list, and they'll start moving stuff around, because your actions actually do reveal exactly where your priorities lie. So this makes sense. Okay, so knowing this, I want to return to our text. Now let me give you some historical context before we read through the parable of the great banquet together. First of all, who is Jesus speaking to when he tells this story, this parable? And the answer to that question, I'm just going to move this back. The answer to that question is Jesus is actually speaking to lawyers and Pharisees. These are religious leaders who had spent their lifetime studying the scriptures, what we call the Old Testament. They knew the law of Moses. They knew what the prophets taught. And they, all of them, would have said, we love God most. They would all claim that this is the sequence of their priorities. And Jesus is telling this story in part to prove to them that that is actually not the case, that there are other things above God in their lives. This is not something that's going to be easy for them to accept and understand. What I love at the end of the parable, we actually get to discover, we're talking about what our priorities are, we discover at the end of the parable what God's priorities are. Here's what Jesus says the master does. The master says this, compel people to come in that my house may be filled. So God's priority is people. God's priority since the beginning of time has been to seek and save that which is lost. God's priority has been to make a home for his children and to have them with him for eternity. That's been his plan. That's the whole arc, the whole story of the Bible is exactly that his house may be filled. By the way, before Jesus went up to heaven, you know what he said to his disciples? He said, I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, you may be also. What's Jesus saying? He's saying, my thrust, my priority is to have a home for us to be in together. So God's priority, Jesus' priority is you and me. And he's making space for us. The question is, are we making space for him? And often we think we are, and yet what we'll discover is that other things creep in. When Jesus told the parable of the soils, right? The parable of the sower. There were 4 different kinds of soils. Hard soil that rejected God's word. There was the shallow soil that received it and then died off when things got hard. But the third type of soil is the one that I think many Christians struggle with, and it is what's called thorny or weedy soil. So the seed goes into this good soil and starts to produce fruit, and Jesus says the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, all the stuff of life kind of grows up with it and chokes out. We say, God is there. We receive God, and then other things begin to take priority. This is exactly what Jesus is saying. So these individuals who are listening to Jesus know that he's talking about them. As he's telling this story about the people who reject the message and don't come to the banquet, he's talking about them. And we'll talk more about that in the weeks to come. But see, the arc of the Bible story is this, and I'm going to do this in real quick. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And he created the plants and the animals and the fish and the birds and all that. And he made man in his own image, the only creature that God fashioned with his own hands. He made man out of the dust of the earth, breathed into him the breath of life, and he became a living being in the image of God. And after God created everything, he said, it is. That was weak. It is. And then he made the first man, and he looked at him, ladies, can you help me out? And he said, it is. That was so weak. It is good. Said it's good. And then Adam is naming all the animals, and they're all coming before him 2 by 2. And it says that there was none fit, a helper for Adam. There was no one. He was on his own. And it was actually God that said it is not good that he's alone. And God puts him to sleep, takes something out of him, and while he's asleep, he forms and fashions woman to be a partner, to work alongside the man. And when he wakes up from surgery, and he's groggy, and he looks over, and there's this beautiful woman for him to have and to hold. She had no clothes on. And he said, come on, it's good. But here's, sorry. Adam and Eve, what it tells us in the opening chapters of Genesis, that Adam and Eve walk and talk with God. Their relationship with him is personal. I can't even imagine, I have so many questions for God. I can't imagine walking beside him and being like, what about that? And why did you make it that way? And why did the stars, and I have so many questions. And they were able to walk and talk with him and to be in that kind of proximity and fellowship with him. And of course, as you know, God gave them one restriction, and that one restriction was not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God said, in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. So of course, you know the story. Satan comes and tempts Eve. Oh, what God said isn't true. And so she takes and eats of the fruit, and she doesn't immediately die. And so Adam's probably looking, what kind of guy lets her eat it first, right? It's like, oh, she didn't die. And so then, anyway, that's a different sermon. Adam then eats, and both of them, they know that they are naked and shame, and they're uncovered, and they begin hiding from God. But the results of their rejection of God's authority, the result of their sin means separation. And so they're cast out of the garden, and they're separated from the tree of life. And mankind enters, but it wasn't just Adam and Eve that fell because of their sin, but actually all of creation fell. You know this, right? We look at the world, and the world exists, and the world, and we go, there's beauty there, but there's also stuff that shouldn't be. And that's because that came into the world because of sin. Death came into the world because of sin. Disease came in. Weeds, thistles, and thorns, and hard work. That's part of the curse. Painful childbirth, call centers, all of these things. I added the last one in, right? These things came into the world as part of the curse. And so here's the thing. Some people would say, well, Nathan, you need to explain to me why God would even put the tree there. Why would he allow them? And why? It's not my fault. They sinned. I didn't. Why do I have to live in a broken world? And I don't have all the answers for you, but here's what I can tell you. The story of the Bible from start to finish is this: that God, from the beginning of time, made a plan to seek and save that which is lost. That God, from the moment Adam and Eve fell into sin, went about working to bring our salvation, working to restore us back to him. And from the beginning of time, he made a covenant with Abraham, with Moses, with David, and many others. He spoke through the prophets. And the whole arc of history says, I'm sending someone to fix what you broke. I'm sending someone to save you from your sins. I'm sending a king. I'm sending the Son of David. I'm sending someone who will be a prophet and a teacher and the Lamb of God. And so there's all these promises, over 300 prophecies specifically about Jesus and what he would do. And the men listening to Jesus know very well that God had promised to send someone. They knew that God was trying to save his people. And yet, when the Messiah, the Savior, shows up on their doorstep, they reject him. In fact, when Jesus shows up and says, I'm the one you've been waiting for, they go, no, you're not. And their priorities are going to be revealed in how they receive or don't receive Christ. And guess what? The same is true for you and me. So let's walk through the text. I'm going to walk through it verse by verse, and I'll try to do this quickly. It says this, for when one who reclined at table with him heard these things, he said to him, blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. This is how the story begins. The guy sitting there, if you can go back, just hang on to that verse for a second. As he's sitting there, he basically says, won't it be amazing one day when the kingdom arrives? And if you listened and read the words of Jesus, you'll know that when Jesus came, he came with this message: the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of God is here. It's now. It's not in the future. It's now. It's to be received now. See, they're thinking someday we're going to get a messenger show up and tell us the time is now. And Jesus is like, I'm here. The time is now. Okay? And he said to him, a man once gave a banquet and invited many. And so they know he's talking about God inviting his people, preparing everything for his people, inviting them. And at the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, come, everything is now ready. For many of us, when we think about God, when we think, our thoughts are like this: someday I'm going to surrender my life to him. Someday I'm going to have all the answers to my questions. Someday I'm going to forgive my dad. Someday I'm going to get baptized. Someday I'm going to become generous. Someday I'm going to obey his commands. It's like, yeah, that's coming and I look forward to it. But the truth is, when Jesus shows up, he's like, today is the day of salvation. Today is the day to obey and take steps of obedience. Today is the day. So we're like, someday, and he's like, today. Everything is now ready. But guess what? Even though Christ arrived with the message of the kingdom, I'm here, the one you've been waiting for, trust in me, they all began to make excuses. So let's look at the excuses that they made. I find them kind of interesting. The first said to him, I bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused. He's got a real estate transaction. It's kind of a big deal. I mean, if you bought a house this morning, you probably wouldn't be in church. You'd be like, I got to go. I got to go sign the papers. Like, this is a big deal. But when you look at the excuse a little more carefully, it actually reveals itself to be an excuse. I bought a field, and I must go see it. I'm no real estate tycoon, but if I bought a piece of land, I would go see it first. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I bought a piece of property, and you go and look at it, it's a swamp, right? You're like, okay, bad idea. If you're the kind of person who buys a field without seeing it, I have a deal for you. Come talk to me after church, okay? Okay, I bought a field, and I must go and see it. So essentially, what this person is saying, I got this, let me move stuff around here. Whatever. We'll put the kids down here for now. Okay. So this guy's essentially going, you know what? Jesus, like, for some of you, I'm here. I'm announcing the kingdom, and you're like, I'm too busy. I'm making money. I got a real estate transaction to do. Notice what the next guy says. Another said, I bought 5 yoke oxen, and I go to examine them. Now, yoke of oxen, you're like, what do you do with that? That's essentially a tractor or a truck. Okay, this is a business dude, right? He's got fields to plow, he's got roads to build, and he needs oxen. He's expanding his business. And so essentially what he's saying is like, hey, this takes precedence. There's stuff to do. I got no time for Jesus. There's stuff to do. There we go. Sorry, spouse. Hard to shuffle those. So we got 2 excuses. One is money and stuff. The next is work. Now he says, please excuse me. And let's see what the next one is. We got a third excuse here. Please have me excused. And another said, I have married a wife. Some of you are laughing because you've heard this excuse. This is like 2,000 years later, it's still being used. Hey, Nate, you want to go golfing? I've married a wife. And I can't come. I know Jesus is calling me. I know that there are things I need to do for God, but, if my wife isn't happy, my life won't be happy, and so I am going to put her first. So you can see what's happening here in this illustration, in this parable. Jesus you can say you love God. You can say He's first, and you love Him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But in actuality, the evidence is that when God calls you, that when God asks you to do some of these other things are taking precedence. And we read the story, and we're like, what a bunch of, these guys are terrible. We do the same thing. We do the same thing. Whatever is most important to us finds itself at the top of our pillar of priorities. And so he goes on to say this. He says, the servant came and reported these things to his masters. Like, the people you invited, they're not coming. Now this is in part, to understand this parable, Jesus came first to the Jews, his own people, the descendants of Abraham. He came and said, salvation has been here for you. And many, not all, many of them rejected him. In fact, some of them even had him crucified. Okay? And the servant came and said, they're not responding. They're not accepting you. They're not coming. And he goes on to say this. He got angry. Now that actually makes sense. I don't know if have you ever made someone a meal and you spend all afternoon and you're getting everything ready and it's like 5:30 and they don't show up? 6 o'clock, 6:10. They roll in at 6:15. It's like, oh, it's no big deal. It's like, oh, it's a big deal. I've been preparing all day. This is normal. God is angry because the people that He's been working for centuries to prepare for, preparing a place, preparing salvation, preparing His own Son to die, and they're like, we don't have no time for that. He's angry, and He says to His servant, go out quickly into the streets and the lanes of the city and bring back the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. These were the people that the religious leaders of His day thought were outcasts. Like, God doesn't care about them. That's why they're sick. And so they were like second-class citizens. He's like, bring them in. Bring them into my house. Bring them into my family. Bring them in. And then He goes on to say this. The servant came and said, sir, what you've commanded has been done, and still there's room. This is so encouraging to me, that there's always room in God's house. There's always room in His family. In fact, even when at times I have not put Him first in my life and made space for Him, He has space for me, and He has made space for you. That's who He is. And there's room. And so He says, bring him in. And He goes on to say this. He says, say to them, go out into the highways and hedges and compel people to come in that my house may be filled. God's priority is His people, to see them saved, to see them come to forgiveness, to see them part of His family. And He says, go out into the highways and the hedges. By the way, this is where the travelers, those who were not Jewish, would be, right? The outcasts. That's you and me, by the way. We're included in God's family. He says, bring them in. Compel them to come in. The word compel is a very strong word, right? There's invitations like, hey, do you want to come over? Compelling is like, you're coming over. Grab them by the ear. Let's get in the car. You're coming. That's compelling. He says, compel them to come in at any cost. Get them here. Get them here so that my house may be filled. And then he finishes with this statement, which is so severe. I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet. Those who reject Christ will not find His salvation and will not find His presence. And so what we want to do is make Him first in our lives. What I wanted to do as we close the service, can we get practical for just a minute? Because I've talked theologically. I'm talking about putting God first and how He's not always first in our lives, and we've got to shuffle our priorities. And what I want to do is I want to share with you 4 ways that we can put Him first. These are practical things. Because as I said, our priorities are displayed in our actions. And so here's the first one. The first way that we can demonstrate and place God first in our life is through, say it with me, obedience. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commands. If you love me, obey my word. Jesus said, whoever hears my words and does them will be like a wise man who built his house upon a rock. As Christians, we often know all of what He has said, but we don't do all of what He said. And I'm telling you, if you want to grow in your faith this fall, if you want to truly have God move towards the place where He ought to be in your life, the first thing you ought to do is consider, what does it mean to be obedient? I'm guessing that almost every person in this room, God has said something to you. He's asked you to forgive someone. He's asked you to help someone. He's asked you to do something, and you're just like, I don't know, Minecraft. social media, yard work. There's all this other stuff that's vying for our attention and pulling us. And here's what I can promise you, that when you are obedient to God, it won't be easy, it'll be hard. But when you take a step to be obedient and do what he's asked, this is what happens. You're saying in that moment of obedience, God, what you say is more important than what I think or want. And I'm putting you above. And he begins to move up in that priority sequence. So obedience is foundational, right? It's not enough to just know what he said, but to do it. Here's the second thing, real quick. We can do a sermon on each of them. Time with him. Our relationship with God is supposed to be exactly that, a relationship. And you don't have a relationship with people you don't spend time with. I can tell you this, when you spend time with somebody, you get to know them. Not just about them, but you get to know who they are. You can begin to anticipate their responses. You can know what they're thinking. And if you have a close friend, a spouse, a brother or sister, then you just look at them and you already know. And the more time that you spend with God, the more that you will know him. And I assure you, the more that you will love him. So there's a lot of different ways that you can spend time with him. One, you can walk and talk with him just like Adam and Eve did. You can walk around your neighborhood or in the forest and talk to God. You can open up his word and read what he has said. You can sit in silence and listen for God to speak to you. These are things that you can do to invest time with him. And when you're doing these things, what's happening is you're prioritizing him. Not just saying that you love him most, but making space for him. And he begins to elevate in your priorities. Here's a third one. Sabbath rest. This is one we don't talk a lot about, but when we take time, there's a reason God commanded his people to shut everything down one day a week. And I know we don't do that the way that they did it. They took it very seriously. When we rest, you go on holidays and you sit around and sleep in and spend time with your family and loved ones and your friends. All of these things already start sorting themselves out when you're rested. Have you noticed this? When you're exhausted, stressed, and tired and overworked, all this stuff gets out of whack really quickly. When you're rested, you're like, I should eat healthy and exercise. When you're stressed out and exhausted, you're like, pass the chips. Because you don't have the energy. All your priorities are out of alignment. Your energy is out of alignment. So resting is actually an act of faith that when I stop, God is going to keep working. That as I stop and take time to rest, as God has told me to, that all these things begin to line themselves up. So rest is, maybe somebody here needs to hear that today. I do. I'm preaching to myself. Number 4, worship. One of the reasons why we show up every Sunday, in part, hopefully to hear a message that encourages us, challenges us, but worship, we don't underestimate the power of worship. When I was standing over there, listening as the people of God are singing about God's goodness and speaking the name of Jesus. As we're worshiping him and going, worship people are like, what is worship? Is worship singing? No, worship is elevating God. That's what worship is. Saying you are worth more, worthship. And so as we come into this place and we're singing about him and who he is and what he's done, we are actually elevating him. And as we're standing here singing together, some of this stuff is getting reshuffled just by being here. It's one of the reasons why we come together and why church isn't the same when we're not together and we're not worshiping together and elevating him. And as we're worshiping him and putting him high, everything else begins to align. So here's my challenge to you today, and I'm going to share one passage and I'm going to pray. My challenge is simply this: schedule your priorities. When I was on holidays a number of weeks ago, I actually mapped out my perfect week. And I'm like, I got time with Jesus here, and I got exercise here, and I got all my planning, and I got my work stuff, and my family, and my sports stuff. And it's like all on there. It's like, okay, I got the perfect plan. And I scheduled my priorities. And then now over the last 2-3 weeks, I've been checking back to see how I did. It's like 2 out of 5. But by scheduling priorities, I was doing things that I would have left behind because I put them in a place of priority. And that's what I'm inviting you to do. This week, you say, well, what am I going to do? How do I change? How do I reorder all my priorities? Here's what I'd say. Just decide today that you're going to, for the next 7 days, take time with God each morning and set 10 or 15 minutes read a devotional, open up the Bible and pray, and just set it and do it no matter what. Do it no matter what. Make it a priority. And I'm not going to tell you that the heavens will open and angels will come down on ladders. What I can tell you is that at the end of the week, God will be higher in your priority list than he was coming in here today, because you are acting like he's a priority, and you're placing that in a place of importance in your life. So super simple. We're going to have the band come up in just a moment. They're going to sing a song, Make Room. And as you sing the song, I actually invite you to stay seated. And I want you to, as they're singing and leading us in the song, I want you to take the opportunity to go, if there's one thing that I could change and do this week to make God the priority in my life, to truly put him first, what would it be? And to think that through. I'll close with this. Matthew 6:33. I was thinking about it all week. I learned this passage when I was a little kid. And in Matthew 6:33 it says this: seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. By the way, everything on this list is a good thing. But if good things, this is a good thing. God wants you to have stuff and money to feed your family. But if that becomes out of sequence, out of priority, it's going to cause all kinds of havoc in your life. And so if we seek first the kingdom of God, and if we put him in the place of preeminence, everything else, as we obey him, will begin to come into line. So would you join me? I'm going to pray for us, and then the band's going to lead us in this song. I really want to give everyone the opportunity to reflect on whatever God is showing you today. Father God, thank you for this fall season. Thank you for the opportunity we have to talk about our priorities over the coming weeks. God, we want to be people who make space for you. We don't want to be like those in the story who had no room for God. Lord, many of us in this place would say we want you to be first. We want to love you with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. But that's not how our week always plays out. And so, God, we just ask that you would guide us by your Spirit, empower us to take steps of obedience, to spend time with you, to rest and to worship you, and to move in your direction, and to have you be in that place of preeminence in our lives and in our hearts. And God, that is our prayer, and we ask that you would answer it and be with us as we take steps in this direction. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.